Think about the last time you found yourself in the middle of a heated argument. Maybe it was with a coworker over a missed deadline, a family member about something trivial, or even a stranger who cut in line. That rush of frustration, the way your words came out sharper than you intended, the lingering tension afterward, we've all been there. Conflict is inevitable, but what if I told you there's a way to navigate these moments with such clarity and calm that you not only resolve the issue but leave the other person and yourself feeling respected and heard? This is where Stoicism, an ancient philosophy practiced by great minds like Marcus Aurelius, offers us something extraordinary: the power of calm, rational communication. Marcus Aurelius, one of history's most revered Stoic thinkers, once wrote that our reactions are choices, not reflexes. He reminded himself daily to pause before speaking, to listen deeply, and to respond with reason rather than emotion. Imagine applying that same discipline to your next difficult conversation. Instead of reacting defensively or escalating tensions, you could choose words that de-escalate, clarify, and even transform the dynamic entirely. That's not just theory, it's a skill anyone can learn, and it starts with understanding how Stoic principles can reshape the way we communicate. In this video, we're going to explore how Stoic communication turns conflict into connection. You'll discover practical techniques to keep your cool under pressure, how to frame your words so they're heard without hostility, and why mastering this art doesn't just resolve arguments, it builds stronger relationships. Whether you're dealing with a difficult colleague, a strained friendship, or even your own inner critic, these tools are timeless. By the end, you'll have a blueprint for turning heated moments into opportunities for growth, all through the quiet power of Stoic wisdom. So if you're ready to change the way you communicate, and by extension, the way you experience conflict, let's begin. Stoicism teaches us that emotions themselves aren't the problem. It's how we handle them that determines whether they help or harm us. Think of anger, frustration, or even excitement as waves in the ocean. The wave isn't good or bad, it just is. But if you let it knock you off balance, you'll struggle to stay afloat. That's the core of the Stoic approach to conflict, recognizing that emotions are natural, but they don't have to steer the conversation. Epictetus, the great Stoic philosopher, put it simply when he said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." In other words, the first step in mastering Stoic communication is learning to pause between the emotion and the reaction, that tiny space where choice lives. Picture this: you're in a team meeting and a colleague criticizes your idea in front of everyone. Your face flushes, your pulse races. That's the initial impression, the raw emotion. But here's where Stoicism gives you power. Instead of firing back or shutting down, you take a breath and ask yourself, is this criticism fair? What part of it can I use to improve? By separating the emotion from the response, you turn a heated moment into a chance for growth. Detachment doesn't mean being cold or indifferent. It means seeing the situation clearly, without letting the emotional noise distort your judgment. Now think back to your own life. When was the last time emotions hijacked a conversation you cared about? Maybe you snapped at a loved one over something small, or let resentment build because you didn't pause to question your initial reaction. The Stoics would say those moments are where the real work happens. Every conflict is a training ground, a place to practice choosing reason over reaction, clarity over chaos. And when you start to see emotions as signals rather than commands, you'll find yourself navigating disagreements with a calmness that surprises even you. This mindset shift is especially powerful in the modern workplace, where stress and high stakes can turn minor misunderstandings into full-blown disputes. Imagine two co-workers arguing over a missed deadline. One reacts with blame, the other with defensiveness. Escalation is almost guaranteed, but the Stoic approach would be different. Instead of focusing on who's at fault, you'd ask, what's the real issue here? How can we solve it together? That subtle reframe changes everything. It's not about suppressing emotions, it's about refusing to let them dictate the outcome. When you master that pause, you don't just resolve conflicts, you prevent them from spiraling in the first place. One of the most powerful tools in Stoic communication is something we all have access to but rarely use to its full potential: the pause. Seneca, the great Stoic philosopher and advisor to Emperor Nero, wrote extensively about the value of delaying our reactions, especially when anger flares. In one of his letters, he described anger as a brief madness, a fire that burns brightest in the moment but fades if we simply refuse to feed it. His advice: the greatest remedy for anger is delay, not suppression, not denial, just a deliberate moment of space between the spark of emotion and the words we choose to speak. History gives us a striking example of this principle in action with Cato the Younger, a Roman statesman known for his unshakable composure. Once, during a heated political debate, an opponent publicly insulted him, hurling personal attacks to provoke a reaction. The crowd grew tense, expecting an explosive response, but Cato simply stood there, calm, silent, unmoved. His restraint was so unnerving that the accuser eventually walked away, humiliated not by Cato's words but by his own lack of control. In that pause, Cato demonstrated something profound. Silence isn't weakness, it's a strategic choice that strips conflict of its power. So how does this translate to everyday life? Imagine you're in a tense conversation with a partner who just accused you of not listening. Your first instinct might be to interrupt, to defend yourself immediately. But what happens if instead you take 3 deep breaths? That tiny gap lets the emotional wave pass, giving you clarity to respond with intention rather than reflex. The Stoics understood that most arguments escalate not because of the initial issue, but because reactions pile on reactions, creating a chain reaction of misunderstandings. A well-placed pause breaks that chain. This isn't just about avoiding conflict, it's about reclaiming control. Think back to your last disagreement. How might things have unfolded differently if you'd allowed just 10 seconds of silence before responding? That's the space where empathy can grow, where you might notice the fear behind someone's anger or the insecurity masked by their criticism. The pause is where Stoic communication becomes transformative, turning potential battles into conversations worth having. In professional settings, this skill is even more valuable. A manager dealing with a frustrated employee might feel tempted to assert authority immediately. But a pause, even something as simple as saying, "Let me think about that for a moment," can shift the dynamic from adversarial to collaborative. It signals respect, creates room for reflection, and often reveals solutions that reactive thinking would miss. The Stoics didn't avoid emotions, they mastered the art of not being mastered by them, and it all starts with that intentional, strategic pause. Marcus Aurelius kept a journal not just to record events, but to train his mind in seeing things as they truly were, without the distortion of emotional bias. One of his most famous exercises was rewriting frustrating situations in plain, objective terms. Instead of writing, "My advisor betrayed me," he'd write, "My advisor shared my private concerns with others." Notice the difference. The first version assigns motive and stirs anger. The second states a bare fact, leaving room for reason to intervene. This is the heart of Stoic communication, stripping away the layers of judgment we instinctively add to every conflict and responding only to what's undeniably true. Consider how often we escalate disagreements simply through the language we choose. Telling a partner, "You never listen to me," invites defensiveness because it's an absolute claim, not a fact. But saying, "I noticed my suggestion wasn't acknowledged in the meeting," focuses on observable behavior. The first version closes doors, the second opens a conversation. The Stoics called this skill objective description, and it's a game changer in heated moments. When you remove loaded words, always, never, disrespectful, you remove the emotional tripwires that turn discussions into battles. Social media magnifies this challenge. Imagine two people debating politics online. One comments, "You're clearly ignorant about economics," while the other responds, "Your argument overlooks recent data on wage growth." Which exchange is more likely to stay productive? The first makes the conflict personal. The second keeps it about ideas. This isn't about watering down your views, it's about ensuring they're heard. As Epictetus observed, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth so we can listen twice as much as we speak. Neutral language isn't passive, it's strategic, creating space for dialogue instead of monologue. Try this exercise next time you're upset. Write down the triggering event twice. First, pour out your raw emotional interpretation. "My coworker sabotaged my project." Then rewrite it as Marcus Aurelius would. "My coworker submitted their portion late, causing delays." See how the second version shifts your focus from blame to problem solving. That's the power of objective language. It doesn't deny your feelings, it simply prevents them from clouding your next move. Now apply this to a real conflict you faced. Did your words add fuel or clarity? The Stoics believed that mastering communication starts with mastering perception. When you describe events as they are, not as they feel, you regain control. Not over others, but over your own ability to respond with wisdom instead of react with chaos. And in that space between fact and interpretation, you'll find the quiet strength that turns confrontation into connection. Epictetus, the Stoic philosopher who transformed adversity into wisdom, taught that listening isn't just a skill, it's a duty. He believed true communication begins not with speaking, but with the quiet discipline of hearing another person fully, without the interference of our own ego. Imagine someone sharing a grievance with you. The Stoic approach wouldn't be to formulate a rebuttal while they're still talking, or to dismiss their perspective because it clashes with yours. Instead, it's about giving them the rare gift of feeling truly understood. This is active listening at its highest level, absorbing not just words, but the intentions and emotions behind them. Modern therapy techniques echo this ancient wisdom. Therapists call it reflective listening, repeating back what you've heard in your own words to confirm understanding. It's not about agreeing, but about validating the other person's experience. For example, if a friend says, "You've been distant lately," a reactive response might be, "That's not true, I've just been busy." But a Stoic-inspired reply would sound more like, "It sounds like you've felt neglected. Help me understand what's been missing." That shift alone can diffuse tension and open doors to resolution. Think about the last time someone truly listened to you during a disagreement, not just waited for their turn to speak, but listened with the intent to understand. Chances are the dynamic changed instantly. When people feel heard, their defenses lower. They become more willing to consider your perspective because you've shown them the same courtesy. This isn't about surrendering your stance, it's about creating a space where solutions can emerge naturally. The Stoics took this further by framing listening as an ethical obligation. Epictetus argued that if someone offers criticism, even unfairly, there's value in extracting whatever truth might be hidden within it. Picture a colleague blaming you for a team's setback. Your instinct might be to counterattack or shut down, but what if you paused and asked, "What part of this critique might help me improve?" That's Stoic listening in action, separating the signal from the noise and growing stronger in the process. This practice becomes especially powerful in conflicts where emotions run high. A parent and teenager arguing over curfew might cycle through the same points endlessly. But when the parent says, "I hear that you feel controlled," or the teen acknowledges, "I get that you're worried," the argument stops being a battle and starts being a conversation. The Stoics knew that most disputes aren't won by the loudest voice, but by the most attentive ear. So next time you're in a difficult discussion, try this experiment. Resist the urge to respond immediately. Instead, summarize what the other person said and ask if you've understood them correctly. You'll notice something remarkable: the energy shifts. People become more cooperative when they feel respected. And in that space where listening replaces reacting, even the fiercest disagreements can transform into opportunities for mutual growth. Seneca once wrote that an insult is like a dagger thrown at you. It can only wound if you catch it. Think about that for a moment. Someone shouts something cruel, demeaning, or unfair in your direction. The words hang in the air, but they don't have power until you decide to grab hold of them, turning them over in your mind, letting them cut deeper. This is the Stoic distinction between events and judgments. What happens to us is outside our control, but how we interpret it, whether we internalize it or let it pass, is entirely ours to decide. Take road rage as an example. Someone cuts you off in traffic, honks aggressively, maybe even yells out their window. Your body reacts immediately, heart racing, hands tightening on the wheel. That initial surge of anger is natural, but here's where the Stoic choice comes in. Do you let that anger dictate your next move? Do you shout back, tailgate, or carry that frustration into your next interaction? Or do you pause and remind yourself, this isn't about me. I don't even know this person. Their actions reflect their state of mind, not my worth. That shift in perspective doesn't just diffuse the moment, it protects your peace long after the car has driven away. Now consider a conflict that still stings for you. Maybe it's a harsh comment from a boss, a passive-aggressive remark from a friend, or even a stranger's dismissive tone. Why does it linger? Chances are it's because somewhere along the way you took it personally, you caught the dagger. But what if you hadn't? What if, instead of absorbing the insult, you'd seen it for what it really was: a reflection of the other person's struggles, biases, or bad day, not a verdict on your character? This isn't about dismissing your feelings or pretending hurtful words don't matter. It's about reclaiming agency. The Stoics didn't advocate indifference, they practiced discernment. They asked, is this within my control? Does this person's opinion define me? When you realize the answer is no, something remarkable happens. The insult loses its grip. You're no longer a passive target, but an active chooser, someone who decides what gets to matter. Imagine applying this to your daily life. A coworker rolls their eyes during your presentation. Instead of spiraling into self-doubt, you think, maybe they're stressed about their own deadlines. A family member snaps at you over something trivial. Instead of snapping back, you consider, they've been under a lot of pressure lately. This reframe doesn't excuse poor behavior, but it prevents you from magnifying the conflict unnecessarily. The challenge here isn't to become emotionless, it's to become intentional. Next time a conflict stings, ask yourself, did this truly harm me, or did I let it? That tiny question is the space where Stoic wisdom turns reactions into responses, and where insults lose their power to disrupt your calm. The dagger only wounds if you catch it, so why not let it fall to the ground? Musonius Rufus, the Stoic teacher who endured exile with unbroken dignity, taught that our bodies are messengers long before we speak a word. He trained his students to cultivate a posture of calm, shoulders relaxed, breath steady, movements deliberate. because he understood something profound. Physical stillness isn't just a reflection of inner peace, it actively creates it. Think about the last time you felt angry or flustered. Chances are your body told the story before your mouth did. A clenched jaw, shallow breathing, maybe even fists tightening at your sides. Now imagine reversing that chain reaction. What if, instead of waiting for your mind to calm your body, you used your body to calm your mind? Science backs this ancient wisdom. Studies show that simply uncrossing your arms or relaxing your hands can lower cortisol levels, signaling safety to your nervous system. The Stoics practiced this intentionally. In tense situations, they'd focus on keeping their posture open, palms upturned rather than balled into fists, weight evenly distributed instead of leaning aggressively forward. These subtle shifts don't just change how others perceive you, they rewire your own emotional response. A closed posture fuels defensiveness, an open one invites clarity. Try this experiment next time you're in a difficult conversation. Notice what your hands are doing. If they're clenched, hidden, or pointing, pause and gently rest them open on a table or at your sides. Observe how that small adjustment alters the energy in the room and within you. Musonius called this dignified bearing, a way of carrying yourself that commands respect without demanding it. It's not about rigidity or forced poise, but about aligning your outer presence with the calm you aspire to feel inside. Mirror exercises can accelerate this awareness. Stand facing a mirror and recite a neutral sentence like, "Let's discuss this rationally," a first with tense shoulders and a furrowed brow, then with relaxed features and steady eye contact. The words are identical, but the message transforms entirely. Your face and posture are a silent chorus to your words, amplifying or undermining them with every twitch or tremor. As Marcus Aurelius wrote in his private journal, the soul takes on the color of your thoughts, but it also takes cues from your body. Now consider a modern workplace scenario. Two colleagues debate a project direction. One leans forward, fingers drumming the table, while the other sits back, hands loosely clasped. Even if their words are equally measured, who appears more composed? Who's more likely to de-escalate tension? The Stoics would argue that physical stillness isn't passive, it's a strategic tool. When your body radiates calm, it gives others permission to match that energy, creating a ripple effect that can turn confrontation into collaboration. So ask yourself honestly, does your body betray your calm words? Do subtle gestures, a tense neck, tapping foot, leak frustration you're trying to conceal? The beauty of Stoic posture is that it's a feedback loop you can control. By consciously relaxing your shoulders in a stressful meeting or softening your expression during criticism, you're not just managing perceptions. You're guiding your own emotions back to center, one deliberate breath, one unhurried movement at a time. Marcus Aurelius had a mental exercise he called the view from above, a way of zooming out from any conflict to see it against the vast backdrop of time, space, and human existence. He'd imagine himself floating high above the earth, watching cities shrink to dots, empires fade into dust, and personal quarrels vanish into irrelevance. This wasn't about dismissing problems, but about gaining the clarity that comes with perspective. Because here's the truth, most of what we argue about today won't matter tomorrow, let alone in a decade. The neighbor who plays music too loudly, the coworker who takes credit for your idea, the stranger who was rude in line. These moments feel monumental in the heat of emotion, but time has a way of shrinking them to their true size. Take a story passed down in Stoic circles about two neighbors feuding over a boundary line between their properties. One insisted the fence was 3 inches too far onto his land. The other refused to budge. The dispute escalated: angry letters, legal threats, even family members refusing to speak. Years later, after both men had passed away, their grandchildren found the old property maps and realized the original surveyor had made an error. The invaded land wasn't even part of either plot. All that strife, all that wasted energy over dirt no one truly owned. The Stoics would say this isn't just an anecdote, it's a mirror. How many of our current conflicts are just modern versions of that fence argument? This exercise isn't about minimizing your feelings. It's about freeing yourself from their grip long enough to ask one vital question: will this matter in a year? Not theoretically, not as a vague platitude, but concretely. Picture yourself 12 months from now, looking back at today's disagreement. How much weight will it carry? The coworker who snapped at you this morning, will you even remember their tone by next summer? The friend who forgot your birthday, will that oversight still sting when you're laughing together over coffee? Perspective doesn't erase pain, but it does reveal its expiration date. Now apply this to a conflict you're holding onto right now. Maybe it's lingering resentment toward a family member or frustration with a partner's habits. Close your eyes and imagine your future self watching this moment from a distance. What would they tell you? Chances are they'd focus on what truly endures: the relationships, the growth, the laughter, not the temporary friction. The view from above isn't passive resignation, it's active wisdom. It's choosing not to mortgage your peace for battles that won't survive the test of time. This shift is especially powerful in professional settings. A team clashes over a project detail, voices rising, emails growing terse. But when someone asks, will this decision impact our work 6 months from now? The room often falls quiet. That question acts like a pressure valve, releasing steam from the conversation. It's not about avoiding accountability, it's about allocating energy where it counts. The Stoics knew that most battles aren't worth fighting not because they're hard, but because they're small. And when you learn to distinguish mountains from molehills, you stop exhausting yourself on slopes that will flatten with time. So the next time a conflict hooks your emotions, try this. Pause and mentally zoom out. Picture the Earth from space, a tiny blue dot in an endless cosmos. Then watch as your argument shrinks to invisibility against that scale. Does it change the issue? Maybe not, but it will change you. Because when you see how little room most conflicts occupy in the grand scheme, you'll start saving your strength for what truly deserves it. And that's how petty disputes lose their power, not by being solved, but by being seen for what they are: fleeting shadows against the vast light of a well-lived life. Seneca's letters reveal a profound truth about human conflict. We're all carrying invisible wounds that shape how we speak and act. In one heartfelt message to his friend Lucilius, he wrote, "No one becomes wicked without a reason." Think about that for a moment. When someone snaps at you, cuts you off in traffic, or makes a thoughtless remark, it's easy to assume malice. But the Stoics asked a different question: what unseen weight might they be carrying? This shift from blame to curiosity doesn't excuse poor behavior, it simply gives you the power to disarm it. Picture a family gathering where tensions flare. Your uncle makes a political comment that feels deliberately provocative. Instinct says he's trying to upset me, but Stoic empathy whispers, what if he's lonely? What if this is his clumsy way of feeling heard? The facts haven't changed, but your reaction has. Suddenly, you're not facing an antagonist, you're seeing a flawed human just like you. Seneca modeled this when he described angry people as sick souls needing compassion, not condemnation. He wasn't suggesting you tolerate abuse, but rather that you refuse to let someone else's pain become yours. History offers a striking example in the feud between Seneca and the Emperor Nero. As Nero's advisor, Seneca watched the young ruler's cruelty escalate, yet his letters show he never reduced Nero to a monster. Instead, he wrote about the fear behind tyranny, the insecurity that drives people to dominate others. That insight didn't save Seneca's life, but it allowed him to face his execution without hatred, understanding that Nero's actions reflected brokenness, not some inherent evil. Now reflect on your own life. Have you ever misinterpreted someone's intent? Maybe a friend's sharp tone wasn't indifference but exhaustion. A coworker's stubbornness wasn't defiance but fear of failure. The Stoics called this seeing with the eyes of the dead, imagining how you'd perceive the conflict if you knew your time was limited. Would that snippy comment still feel worth your energy? Would being right still matter more than being kind? This practice isn't about becoming a doormat. It's about reclaiming your peace by recognizing that most conflict comes from unhealed places. When you start asking what pain drives their words, you stop taking the bait. Their outburst becomes a clue, not a verdict. You might even respond with something disarming like, "That seems really important to you. Help me understand why." That simple pivot can transform a shouting match into a conversation. So next time someone's behavior frustrates you, try Seneca's lens. Look past the surface to the human beneath, flawed, fragile, and fighting battles you can't see. It won't erase every conflict, but it will free you from the exhausting cycle of taking things personally. And in that space, you'll find something unexpected. The power to respond not with reaction, but with quiet, unshakable wisdom. Epictetus taught that between any event and our reaction lies a space, often microscopic, where we either grant or withhold assent to our automatic thoughts. This is where Stoic communication begins, not with the words we speak aloud, but with the silent dialogue we have with ourselves. Imagine receiving an email that makes your stomach drop, a client blaming you for a mistake, a boss questioning your judgment. Your fingers hover over the keyboard, itching to fire back a defense. But right there, in that sliver of a moment, Epictetus would ask, is this thought useful? Is it true, or is it just the first spark of emotion masquerading as fact? Consider the story of a project manager who once drafted a scathing reply to a colleague's criticism late at night. The email was eloquent, biting, and utterly regrettable by morning. What changed? In the cold light of day, she realized her response wasn't about solving anything. It was about proving she'd been wronged. That's the trap of unchecked inner dialogue. We confuse the urgency of our emotions with the importance of the issue. The Stoic remedy is disarmingly simple. Pause and interrogate your own mind before engaging your mouth or keyboard. Ask, will this thought move me toward resolution or retaliation? This discipline shines brightest in conflicts where our self-talk turns toxic. They never respect me. I always get treated unfairly. This proves I'm not good enough. These aren't just passing thoughts, they're narratives we reinforce with every repetition, stories that shape how we show up in disagreements. Epictetus called this giving assent to false impressions. When we let these scripts run unchecked, they become self-fulfilling prophecies. Walk into a conversation believing you'll be disrespected, and you'll likely interpret every pause as dismissal, every question as challenge. The email regret story reveals a deeper truth. Our worst communication moments usually stem from acting on thoughts we didn't examine. That manager's late-night draft wasn't wrong because the criticism was false. It was wrong because her response came from a place of wounded pride, not problem-solving. The Stoic alternative, she might have written the angry email and then deleted it, not as suppression but as conscious choice. The act of writing could have helped process the emotion, while the act of deleting honored her higher goal, maintaining a collaborative relationship. Now turn the lens inward. What phrases echo in your mind during tense moments? They're out to get me. I have to win this. If I back down, I'll look weak. These aren't neutral observations, they're emotional kindling, ready to ignite at the slightest spark. The power of Epictetus' teaching lies in recognizing that we don't have to believe every thought that crosses our mental stage. Some deserve attention, others deserve a respectful nod as they exit. This skill becomes vital in digital communication where tone is easily misread. A terse message from a coworker might trigger thoughts like they're being hostile, when in reality they're just rushing between meetings. The Stoic practice is to mentally rewrite the narrative. They're busy. This isn't personal. I'll ask for clarification. By disciplining your inner dialogue, you prevent misassumptions from escalating into real conflict. Try this experiment today. Carry a small notebook or use your phone's notes app to jot down reactive thoughts during tense interactions. Don't judge them, just observe. Then, before speaking or responding, apply Epictetus' filter. Is this useful? You'll start noticing how often your first mental response is more about ego than understanding, more about being right than being connected. And in that noticing, you'll find the freedom to choose something better. The real magic happens when this practice becomes habitual. Over time, you'll catch harmful self-talk earlier, sometimes before it fully forms. A raised voice won't automatically mean attack. A disagreement won't equal rejection. You'll develop what the Stoics called prosouch attention to your inner world, and that attention becomes the safeguard against communication you'll later regret. After all, the words we speak to others are only as wise as the conversations we've already had with ourselves. Cato the Younger, the uncompromising Stoic who famously resisted Julius Caesar's tyranny, might seem an unlikely teacher on the art of yielding. Yet history reveals a fascinating paradox. This same man who refused to bend on matters of principle was remarkably flexible when it came to everything else. During his political career, Cato would often concede minor debates, even allowing opponents to claim small victories, all to preserve his energy for battles that truly mattered. This wasn't weakness, it was strategic wisdom. The Stoics understood that insisting on having your way in every minor dispute drains the resilience needed for the fights worth fighting. Consider a modern marriage where partners clash over something as trivial as how to load the dishwasher. One insists dishes must face inward, the other prefers outward. A Stoic approach wouldn't involve passive surrender or heated arguments. It would ask a simple question: does this detail affect the integrity of our relationship? If not, yielding becomes an act of strength, not submission. The ancient Stoics called this the discipline of assent, knowing when to stand firm and when to let go for the sake of higher harmony. History offers a striking example from Cato's life. When negotiating with political rivals, he'd sometimes concede on procedural votes, letting them win insignificant battles, so he could rally strength for moral standoffs. In one instance, he allowed a petty amendment to pass unchallenged, preserving his credibility for the moment when he blocked an unjust law days later. His opponents dismissed him as inconsistent, but Cato knew the truth. Victory isn't about winning every skirmish, it's about choosing the right terrain. This philosophy transforms how we handle everyday conflicts. That coworker who insists meetings must start exactly on the minute. The neighbor who complains about your lawn being half an inch too tall. These aren't tests of your principles, they're invitations to practice discernment. As Marcus Aurelius wrote in his private journal, ask yourself, does this thing concern what's truly within my control, or am I confusing preference with moral necessity? Imagine a couple arguing over vacation destinations. One craves mountains, the other the beach. A Stoic resolution might sound like this: this year we'll follow your preference, next year mine. Not because either choice is objectively better, but because preserving goodwill matters more than the location itself. The The Stoics would call this loving the obstacle, turning compromise into an opportunity to strengthen connection rather than weaken pride. So pause and ask yourself, what unimportant hills are you currently dying on? The rigid stance you've taken with a friend over something trivial, the need to prove your sibling wrong about a meaningless fact. Concession isn't about losing, it's about consciously choosing where to invest your limited emotional capital. Because when you stop fighting over everything, you'll have the clarity and the energy to stand unshakably for what truly counts. Seneca's letters reveal an art rarely mastered: the ability to admit fault with dignity rather than drama. When criticized by his friend Lucilius, he didn't deflect or diminish the feedback. Instead, he wrote back with striking clarity, "You've shown me my error, and for that I thank you." No groveling, no self-pity, just a direct acknowledgement that honored both the truth and his own self-respect. This is the Stoic apology, a balanced act of taking responsibility without surrendering self-worth. Imagine applying this to a recent mistake at work. Instead of, "I'm such an idiot for missing that deadline," you might say, "I underestimated the timeline and that impacted the team. Here's how I'll adjust my process." See the difference? One version crumbles under shame, the other builds trust through accountability. The framework Seneca modeled unfolds in 3 deliberate steps. First, acknowledge the specific action without vague generalities. Not, "Sorry if I upset you," but, "I see how interrupting you in the meeting silenced your input." Next, amend with tangible action. Seneca often followed admissions with commitments like, "I'll consult you before drafting replies to your letters." Finally, avoid repeating the error by identifying the root cause. Was it haste, pride, poor listening? A Stoic doesn't wallow in guilt. They dissect the misstep like a surgeon, learning from it without being defined by it. Contrast this with ego-driven defensiveness, the reflexive, "But you also," or "I only did it because." These aren't apologies, they're covert counterattacks. Ancient Rome's courtrooms were filled with orators twisting words to avoid blame, much like modern social media threads where "I regret that you felt offended" masquerades as remorse. The Stoics rejected this theater. When Cato the Younger misspoke in a Senate debate, he didn't spin his words, he paused, corrected himself publicly, and moved on. That unvarnished honesty didn't weaken his position, it cemented his credibility. Think back to a time when someone's genuine admission disarmed your anger. Maybe a partner said, "I was distracted when you needed me, and that wasn't fair," or a coworker admitted, "I took credit for your idea in that email, let me fix that." Notice how their courage to be vulnerable often inspired your compassion. That's the paradox Stoics understood. True strength lies in the willingness to be wrong. Seneca wrote, "He who fears correction will never grow wise," recognizing that every apology is an invitation to evolve. Now examine your own resistance. What makes admitting fault so difficult? Often, it's the fear that acknowledging error will diminish us. But history's most respected leaders, from Marcus Aurelius to modern figures like Abraham Lincoln, were those who could say, "I was mistaken." Lincoln once retracted an entire military order after a subordinate pointed out its flaws, later thanking him for preventing a disaster. That's the Stoic spirit, valuing progress over pride. Try this reframe. View apologies not as surrenders but as strategic recalibrations. Just as a ship's captain adjusts course without shame when tides shift, we can correct our actions without eroding our self-image. Next time you're tempted to double down on a flawed position, ask Seneca's question, "Does clinging to this serve my integrity or just my ego?" The answer will guide you toward the kind of apology that doesn't just mend fences, it builds bridges strong enough to bear the weight of deeper connection. Musonius Rufus, the Stoic teacher who faced exile with unwavering composure, had a remarkable way of drawing boundaries, not with anger or apology, but with serene finality. He believed kindness and firmness weren't opposites, they were two sides of the same coin. Picture a colleague who constantly derails meetings with negativity. The reactive approach might be to snap back or silently fume, but Musonius would model something different, a calm but unshakable, let's focus on solutions, followed by deliberate silence. No hostility, no drama, just a gentle closing of the door on unproductive behavior. This ancient wisdom mirrors modern psychology's gray rock technique, a method for dealing with toxic personalities by becoming as uninteresting as a plain gray stone. When a coworker tries to bait you into drama, responding with neutral, unemotional replies like "I see" or "let me think about that" deprives their behavior of oxygen. The Stoic twist, doing this not as a tactic to frustrate them, but as an act of self-respect. It's not about winning, it's about refusing to play a game that serves no one. Consider a real-world scenario. A team member habitually dumps last-minute work on you with a guilt-tripping, "You're the only one I trust." A Stoic response wouldn't involve martyring yourself or lashing out. Instead, you might say, "I appreciate your trust, but I need advance notice to do quality work. Let's schedule time tomorrow to plan ahead." Notice what's happening here. You're acknowledging their words' kindness while upholding your limits' firmness. Musonius taught that boundaries without bitterness are like garden fences. They don't shout, "Stay out." They simply define where your care begins and ends. The challenge arises when we confuse kindness with perpetual availability. A manager who can't say no to extra projects burns out while resenting their team. A parent who never sets limits raises children unprepared for reality. Stoicism reframes boundaries as ethical obligations, not just to ourselves but to others. By saying, "I can't take this on right now," you're modeling self-awareness others might later emulate. So where does this balance falter for you? Is it the friend who always turns conversations into complaints? The relative who bulldozes your time with constant favors? Identify one relationship where yes comes more from habit than choice. Then channel Musonius. Next time they overstep, pause and respond with something both warm and immovable. "I care about you, but this isn't something I can discuss right now." The first time will feel uncomfortable, but with practice you'll discover what the Stoics knew. Serenity isn't the absence of conflict, it's the presence of unshakable respect for your own peace. Marcus Aurelius kept a private journal not for others to read, but to remind himself of an essential truth. You don't have to turn this into something. It doesn't have to upset you. He wrote those words as an antidote to the showy rhetoric of his time, the sophists who twisted logic to win applause, the politicians who valued style over substance. The Stoic emperor saw through the illusion that eloquence equals wisdom. Real communication, he believed, wasn't about dazzling an audience. It was about uncovering truth, even when that truth required simple, unadorned words. Think about the last time you witnessed an online debate, perhaps about politics, parenting styles, or even something as mundane as pineapple on pizza. Notice how quickly these exchanges devolve into performative arguing. One person drops a statistic, the other responds with a sarcastic meme, and soon the original topic is buried under layers of gotcha moments and clever comebacks. This isn't dialogue, it's verbal combat where the goal shifts from understanding to domination. The Stoics would recognize this immediately. 2,000 years ago, they warned against the seduction of winning arguments at the expense of truth. As Marcus scribbled in his notes, "If anyone can prove me wrong and show me my mistake, I'll gladly change. What I seek is the truth which never harmed anyone." There's a revealing story about the philosopher Antisthenes who inspired Stoic thought. When a young student boasted of his ability to out-argue anyone, Antisthenes handed him a coin and said, "Now persuade me this isn't real." The student, confused, insisted the coin was obviously genuine. Antisthenes smiled. "You see, when your argument aligns with reality, you don't need tricks." That's the heart of Stoic humility in speech, the willingness to let facts stand on their own without embellishment or manipulation. Modern social media thrives on the opposite principle. Algorithms reward snappy takedowns, not nuanced exploration. A tweet declaring, "Science proves vaccines are dangerous," gets more engagement than a thread explaining how medical studies actually work. This environment trains us to prioritize persuasion over accuracy, to value the appearance of certainty over the messy process of learning. The Stoic corrective is simple but radical. Before speaking or typing, ask yourself, is this meant to enlighten or to prevail? The moment you care more about being right than getting it right, you've lost the thread. Consider a Reddit thread where two users debate climate change. One cites peer-reviewed studies in plain language, the other responds with cherry-picked data and ad hominem attacks. Who's more likely to change minds? Research shows that humility phrases like, "Here's what I've found, but I'm open to other evidence," increases credibility, while dogmatism triggers defensiveness. The Stoics knew this intuitively. Epictetus taught his students to speak as if testifying in court, with clarity, precision, and respect for the facts, even when those facts contradicted their biases. This discipline becomes especially vital in personal relationships. Imagine a couple arguing about finances. One says, "You're terrible with money." The other counters, "Oh yeah. Well, you're a control freak." Notice how both statements are designed to hurt, not to solve. A Stoic approach would strip away the drama. We're spending 30% more than we earn. How can we adjust? No flair, no blame, just the unvarnished truth that invites collaboration. The challenge isn't to abandon passion, but to direct it wisely. Seneca admired poets and orators, but he cautioned against mistaking their art for philosophy. Truth, he wrote, needs no decoration. Next time you're tempted to score rhetorical points, pause and channel Marcus Aurelius' quiet question. Will this add light or just heat? The answer might not win you applause, but it could win you something far more enduring: respect, trust, and the rare satisfaction of having spoken not for victory, but for understanding. Seneca observed that even the most reasonable people become irrational when exhausted, hungry, or emotionally raw, a truth modern science confirms. Studies show decision fatigue depletes our mental bandwidth by late afternoon, while hunger drops blood sugar levels, making us 20% more likely to perceive neutral comments as hostile. The Stoic solution: treat timing as deliberately as you would your words. Picture two scenarios: confronting a roommate about dirty dishes after they've pulled an all-nighter versus waiting until they're rested and fed. The issue hasn't changed, but the likelihood of resolution skyrockets in the second scenario because you've accounted for biology, not just emotions. History offers a masterclass in this principle. When Roman senators needed to negotiate contentious laws, they intentionally scheduled debates for mornings when minds were freshest, and avoided discussions after lavish meals when lethargy clouded judgment. Seneca took this further in his personal life, advising against serious conversations during what he called the shadow hours, those tense moments just before sleep or right after waking when defenses are low. He knew truth requires not just courage but clarity, and clarity depends on physiological states we often ignore. Modern workplaces frequently ignore this wisdom. Performance reviews scheduled for Friday afternoons, budget debates held right before lunch, family arguments erupting at midnight. These are battles lost before they begin. A hospital study revealed that medical errors peak between 3 and 5 p.m., not from incompetence but from circadian troughs. Apply that insight to your next difficult conversation. If critical thinking falters for surgeons during those hours, why assume your conflict resolution skills remain unaffected? Consider a real-life example. A couple argues every evening about household chores, each accusation met with escalating defensiveness. Then they experiment, shifting the discussion to weekend mornings over coffee. Suddenly, solutions emerge, not because the problems vanished, but because well-rested brains collaborate instead of colliding. This mirrors Seneca's advice to Lucilius: never debate philosophy when wine is present, nor personal grievances when weariness weighs heavy. Now reflect on your own conflicts. How many stemmed less from the issue itself than from poor timing? That text sent at 2 a.m. In frustration, the critique delivered as someone rushed out the door, the feedback given during a stressful work crunch. These are sparks thrown onto tinder. The Stoic alternative is disarmingly practical. Schedule hard talks like you would important meetings. Send a calendar invite titled "Discuss Vacation Plans" rather than ambushing your partner during their commute. Ask, is this a good time to talk about something sensitive, before unloading concerns. The deeper insight here isn't just about avoiding bad timing, it's about leveraging good timing strategically. Ancient Athenian diplomats knew to deliver difficult messages right after shared meals, when oxytocin levels were highest. Modern negotiators schedule salary discussions for mid-morning when cortisol dips. These aren't manipulations, they're acknowledgments that human connection depends on biological realities. When Seneca wrote, "Choose your hour as carefully as your words," he wasn't advocating avoidance, he was teaching us to stack the odds for mutual understanding. So next time tension rises, pause and scan the invisible factors. Are you or the other person tired, hungry, distracted, or rushed? If so, table the discussion with dignity. This matters too much to rush, and revisit it when minds are clear. Because conflict resolution isn't just about what you say, but when you're wise enough not to say it. Socrates, the philosopher who inspired Stoicism's deepest inquiries, never wrote a single lecture. Instead, he wandered Athens asking questions not to trap people in contradictions, but to help them uncover their own blind spots. The Stoics adopted this method with precision, recognizing that the right question can do what 1,000 statements cannot: dissolve defenses, reveal hidden assumptions, and create space for genuine dialogue. Imagine a teenager slamming their bedroom door after a tense exchange with their parent. The instinctive reaction might be to assert authority. You will respect this house. But the Socratic approach would sound more like, help me understand what's making this so upsetting for you. That shift from declaration to inquiry changes everything. The first version demands submission, the second invites connection. History preserves a brilliant example of this technique in action. When Zeno of Citium, the founder of Stoicism, was challenged by a critic who called his philosophy impractical, he didn't defend his position with a monologue. He asked, if you saw someone drowning, would you shout instructions or throw a rope? The critic scoffed. Throw a rope, obviously. Zeno smiled. Then why demand speeches when actions serve better? With one question, he exposed the flaw in his opponent's argument without a single counterclaim. That's the power of strategic inquiry. It lets the other person arrive at the truth themselves, making it far harder to reject. Consider a modern workplace conflict where two colleagues clash over project ownership. One insists, "This was my idea first." The other fires back, "But I did all the work." Notice how these statements escalate tension by locking both parties into opposing narratives. Now imagine the same scenario with Socratic questioning. A manager might intervene with, "What parts of this project matter most to each of you?" Or, "How could we structure this so both contributions are honored?" These questions don't take sides, they redirect energy toward solutions. The Stoics called this dialectic, the art of uncovering truth through structured exchange rather than force. The magic lies in the phrasing. Closed questions, "Did you forget the deadline?" often sound accusatory, triggering defensiveness. Open-ended ones, "What challenges came up with this timeline?" encourage reflection. Epictetus demonstrated this when a student complained about being unfairly treated. Instead of agreeing or consoling, he asked, "How do you know it's unfair?" The student paused, then admitted he couldn't be certain. That pause was the breakthrough, the moment he started examining his own judgments rather than blaming external forces. Now reflect on your own communication habits. When conflicts arise, do you interrogate or inquire? There's a telling difference between, "Why would you do that?" and "What were you hoping to achieve here?" The first assumes fault, the second seeks understanding. Parents negotiating screen time with a resistant child might find more traction with, "What do you think is a fair balance?" than with, "You're always on that phone." The former invites collaboration, the latter guarantees resistance. This technique shines in emotionally charged situations where statements tend to polarize. A couple arguing about household responsibilities might cycle endlessly through, "You never help," and "That's not true," but a single question, "What would feeling supported look like to you?" can cut through the noise. It's not about avoiding hard truths, it's about framing them in a way that invites engagement rather than retaliation. The Stoics understood that people cling to their opinions when attacked, but often release them when given room to explore. The next time you're tempted to assert your position, try channeling Socrates. Replace "you're wrong" with "how did you reach that conclusion?" Swap "that's a terrible idea" for "what problem are we trying to solve here?" Watch as the energy shifts from confrontation to curiosity, because the goal isn't to win debate, it's to uncover what's true, even when that truth requires adjusting your own stance. And in that adjustment lies the real victory, not of ego over ego, but of collective understanding over isolated certainty. Epictetus drew a line in the sand 2,000 years ago that still shapes how we handle disappointment today. Some things are up to us, some are not. Your thoughts, your actions, your choices, these lie within your control. Other people's behavior, their decisions, their moods, even their promises, those belong firmly on the other side of that line. Yet how often do we tie ourselves in knots over what someone should have done? The friend who should have called, the partner who should have remembered, the co-worker who should have met their deadline. Every "should" is a silent contract we never signed, a demand that the world conform to our expectations, and when reality inevitably disagrees, resentment rushes in to fill the gap. Take a simple scenario. A close friend promises to help you move, then cancels last minute. The Stoic response wouldn't ignore your disappointment, it would question its source. Is the pain really about the changed plan or about the story you've attached to it? They don't value our friendship. People are unreliable. I'd never do this to them. These interpretations hurt far more than the cancellation itself. Epictetus would ask, did you control their choice? No, but you absolutely control what meaning you assign to it. That's the pivot point, the moment you realize suffering comes not from the event, but from your insistence that reality should be different. History offers a poignant example. When Marcus Aurelius discovered his trusted general Avidius Cassius had betrayed him, he didn't rage about loyalty or justice. Instead, he wrote in his journal, "When you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly." Not because he was cynical, but because he understood human nature. By releasing the expectation that others should behave perfectly, he freed himself from constant disappointment. This wasn't passive resignation, it was strategic emotional armor. Now examine your own resentments. How many stem from unmet shoulds? The parent who should understand you better, the boss who should recognize your efforts, the stranger who should be more considerate. Each is a tiny rebellion against reality, a refusal to accept people as they are rather than as you wish them to be. The Stoic alternative isn't to excuse poor behavior. It's to respond clearly without the added weight of moral outrage. Imagine your flaky friend texts to cancel. You might say, "That's frustrating, I was counting on you," rather than, "You're so selfish." One version addresses the facts, the other judges their character. This shift becomes especially powerful in professional settings. A teammate misses a deadline. The reactive mind screams they're irresponsible, but the Stoic asks, "What can I control here?" Maybe you adjust timelines, clarify expectations, or build buffers for future projects. The point isn't to ignore problems, it's to solve them without the unnecessary suffering of insisting people should be different. There's a liberating irony in this approach. When you stop demanding that others change, you often create the conditions where change becomes possible. That friend who constantly cancels, they might start showing up more when your calm acceptance replaces guilt-tripping. The Stoics knew a secret modern psychology confirms: people resist pressure but respond to presence. By focusing on your half of the equation, how you set boundaries, how you communicate needs, you influence dynamics more than any amount of complaining ever could. So next time a should starts bubbling up, they should have known better, they should have tried harder. Pause and hear Epictetus whispering across the centuries, "You're arguing against reality." The choice then becomes simple: continue wrestling with phantoms of how things ought to be, or direct that energy toward what's actually within your power. Because in that shift lies not just peace, but a newfound ability to navigate the world as it is, not as you insist it should be. Cato the Younger's most defiant act wasn't a speech or a battle, it was his silence. In the Roman Senate, political enemies would often hurl insults, trying to provoke him into an outburst that would undermine his reputation for unshakable integrity. One particularly vicious opponent, hoping to rattle him, once ridiculed his Stoic principles in front of the entire assembly. The room fell tense, waiting for the famous Stoic to retaliate. But Cato simply stood there, motionless, his expression as calm as if he were listening to the weather. His stillness became a mirror, reflecting back the petty theatrics of his adversary until the man, unnerved by his own impotence, slunk away. This wasn't passivity, it was rebellion. In a world addicted to reaction, composure is revolutionary. There's a modern myth that strength looks like loud defiance, that we must match every insult with a sharper comeback. But Cato understood something deeper. True power lies in refusing to let others dictate your emotional state. Think of a viral Twitter feud where celebrities trade burns for likes, or a workplace meeting where the loudest voice dominates. The Stoic alternative: be the person who absorbs hostility without returning it, not because you're weak, but because you're disciplined. When a critic attacks your work publicly, imagine responding with Cato's poise: "I'll consider your perspective carefully." No defensiveness, no counterattack, just an unassailable calm that denies them the chaos they crave. Consider how modern leaders like Jacinda Ardern or Fred Rogers handled public scorn. When Rogers was mocked by a senator for advocating children's television funding, he didn't bristle. He spoke softly about empathy. dismantling the cynicism with such genuine warmth that his critic later apologized. That's the modern equivalent of Cato's Senate floor turning hostility into an opportunity to demonstrate what grace actually looks like. The lesson isn't to tolerate abuse, but to recognize that not every provocation deserves a response. Sometimes the most cutting rebuttal is to simply outlast the storm without getting wet. So ask yourself, who in your life models this kind of quiet strength? Maybe it's a mentor who stays steady under pressure, or a historical figure like Mandela surviving prison with dignity intact. Notice how their power doesn't come from volume, but from an almost eerie self-possession. That's the Stoic secret. When you refuse to be knocked off center, you reveal the instability of those trying to shake you. Your composure becomes the antidote to their chaos. Now picture applying this to your next confrontation. A neighbor posts a snide remark about you online. A relative needles you at a family gathering. The old script says fire back. The Stoic script asks, what do I gain by stepping into this mud? Every time you choose stillness over reaction, you're not just avoiding conflict, you're rewriting the rules of engagement. Because in a world that spins on outrage, the most radical act is to stand firm, unshaken, like Cato in the Senate, proving that sometimes the strongest voice is the one that never needs to raise itself at all. Zeno of Citium, the founder of Stoicism, offered a deceptively simple observation that cuts to the heart of communication. We have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so we can listen twice as much as we speak. But there's a deeper layer to this wisdom, one that recognizes how often our most profound connections happen not through words, but in the spaces between them. Think of sitting with a grieving friend who's just lost a loved one. No pep talk or platitude can touch that kind of pain. What they need isn't your eloquence, it's your presence. The squeeze of a hand, the shared silence over a cup of tea, the willingness to simply bear witness without rushing to fill the void with empty reassurance. That's Stoic silence in action, the understanding that some burdens are too heavy for language, and the bravest thing we can do is show up without scripts. History gives us a moving example from Seneca's letters. When consoling a mother who'd lost her son, he didn't bombard her with philosophical arguments about mortality. Instead, he described sitting quietly with his own grief after his brother's death, how the friends who helped most were those who said nothing but stayed near. Modern grief counselors echo this today. They train volunteers to avoid phrases like, "I know how you feel," or "they're in a better place," because true comfort comes from creating a space where sorrow can exist without correction. The Stoics would call this apatheia, not indifference, but the courage to be fully present with discomfort, whether someone else's or your own. Now consider the opposite scenario, those moments when we reflexively fill silence out of nervousness. A manager delivering tough feedback rushes to soften the blow with excessive praise, muddying the message. A parent lectures a distraught child instead of holding them close. Even in happy contexts, like receiving a compliment, we often deflect with self-deprecation rather than letting the moment land. These are all variations of the same instinct, treating silence as awkwardness to be fixed rather than sacred space to be honored. There's a reason Buddhist monks, Quaker congregations, and even modern tech CEOs practice deliberate silence. It's the ultimate equalizer, a reminder that beneath our chatter, we're all grappling with similar fears and longings. The Stoics took this further by framing silence as a form of respect. When Epictetus advised, if someone speaks foolishly, remain silent, he wasn't advocating passivity. He was teaching that withholding engagement can be more powerful than any rebuttal. Picture a colleague ranting about office politics, hoping to drag you into gossip. Your silence isn't approval, it's a boundary drawn without a single word. So think back to your own life. When has silence spoken louder for you? Maybe it was the teacher who let you struggle with a math problem until the solution clicked, rather than jumping in too soon. The partner who didn't try to fix your bad day, just rubbed your shoulders while you vented. Even in nature, the hush of snowfall, the pause between thunderclaps, we instinctively recognize these wordless moments as sacred. The next time you're tempted to fill a silence, ask yourself, is this for them or for me? Because often the most eloquent thing we can offer isn't our voice, but our willingness to still it. Marcus Aurelius once wrote that 3 questions should guide every word we speak. Is it true? Is it kind? Is it necessary? This simple filter separates persuasion from manipulation, the difference between influencing with integrity and coercing with cleverness. Picture 2 negotiators vying for the same contract. One leans heavily on emotional appeals, painting dire consequences if their terms aren't accepted. The other lays out facts transparently, acknowledges gaps in their proposal, and invites collaboration to bridge them. The first might win a quick concession, but the second builds something far more valuable, trust that outlasts any single deal. That's the Stoic approach to persuasion, rooted not in exploiting fears or desires, but in aligning words with reality. History offers a striking case study in the negotiations between Abraham Lincoln and his political rivals. Facing fierce opposition to the Emancipation Proclamation, Lincoln didn't resort to threats or grandstanding. He presented his reasoning methodically, admitted where his plan fell short, and even incorporated critics' valid concerns into revised drafts. His secretary noted that Lincoln's opponents often left these meetings frustrated not because they'd been outmaneuvered, but because they'd been heard. That's the paradox of Stoic persuasion. By resisting the urge to dominate the conversation, you often gain greater influence. When people feel respected rather than manipulated, their resistance softens. Modern marketing reveals the flip side of this principle. Advertisements screaming, limited time offer, or everyone's buying this, rely on manufactured urgency and social pressure, classic tools of pathos. Compare that to a company like Patagonia, whose environmental commitments sometimes mean discouraging overconsumption. Their famous "Don't Buy This Jacket" campaign highlighted the ecological cost of production, urging customers to purchase only what they truly needed. Sales soared. Why? Because authenticity resonates deeper than artifice. The Stoics would recognize this as ethos, the persuasive power of credibility triumphing over cheap emotional triggers. Now examine your own communication habits. When trying to sway someone, a hesitant client, a skeptical teenager, a reluctant committee, do you amplify consequences to pressure them? Or do you, like Marcus Aurelius advised, strip your argument down to its truest, kindest, most necessary core? There's a revealing test. If your persuasion tactics were exposed publicly, would you feel proud or embarrassed? Manipulation thrives in shadows. Ethical persuasion welcomes scrutiny. Consider a parent negotiating screen time with a resistant child. The manipulative approach might involve guilt. After all I do for you. Or exaggerated threats. You'll fail all your classes. The Stoic alternative, presenting data on sleep disruption, discussing self-regulation as a life skill, and inviting the child to co-create boundaries. One method creates compliance through guilt, the other cultivates understanding through respect. The first might work today, the second builds decision-making muscles for adulthood. This distinction becomes vital in leadership. A manager pushing an unpopular policy could frame dissenters as not team players, leveraging social pressure. Or they could emulate the Stoic philosopher King Marcus Aurelius, who won over skeptics by patiently addressing each concern until, as historical accounts note, even his opponents found themselves agreeing. True persuasion isn't about eliminating resistance, it's about transforming it into collaboration through unwavering integrity. The next time you're tempted to stretch the truth for effect or play on someone's fears, remember, the most enduring influence comes not from bending others to your will, but from standing so firmly in truth that they choose to join you there. Epictetus saw conflict not as something to avoid, but as a training ground, the philosopher's gym where we strengthen our virtues through resistance. He famously said, "The obstacle becomes the way," meaning every difficult conversation, every clash of wills, is an opportunity to practice patience, wisdom, and self-control. Think of it like weightlifting for the soul. Just as muscles grow by resisting gravity, our character deepens by navigating friction with intention. A mentor once gave me painfully direct feedback after a presentation. Your content was strong, but your defensiveness overshadowed it. At first, it stung, but that critique became my barbell, the resistance I needed to build emotional resilience and humility. Consider how athletes approach training. They don't resent the weights, they respect them as tools for growth. The Stoics applied this same mindset to interpersonal friction. A colleague's sharp email, a friend's thoughtless remark, these aren't just annoyances. They're the dumbbells left on the rack of daily life, waiting for us to pick them up and grow stronger. Historical accounts describe Epictetus welcoming criticism from students, not to punish them, but to teach them to distinguish between ego and improvement. When a student once protested, "But they insulted me unfairly," Epictetus replied, "And does their unfairness prevent you from choosing grace? Now reflect on your own recent conflicts." That argument with your partner about household chores, what if it wasn't just a frustration, but a chance to practice active listening? The tense team meeting where opinions clashed, could it have been a lab for practicing clarity under pressure? Even passive-aggressive comments from relatives during holidays carry hidden value. They test our ability to respond with humor or redirect with kindness. The key lies in reframing. Instead of thinking, "Why is this happening to me?" ask, "What is this preparing me for?" Take the story of a young lawyer who dreaded courtroom confrontations until her supervisor pointed out, "Your opponents aren't ruining your day, they're giving you reps." She began viewing each objection as a chance to refine her composure, and within months her performance transformed. That's the Stoic shift, recognizing that friction isn't the enemy of progress, it's the prerequisite. So here's a challenge. Identify one recent conflict that left you rattled. Maybe it was a customer's unreasonable demand or a sibling's dismissive comment. Now strip away the emotional wrapper and ask, what skill could this have helped me practice? Patience, boundary setting, detachment. The answer doesn't excuse poor behavior from others, but it reclaims your power to grow from it. Because in the end, the goal isn't to avoid all conflict, it's to emerge from each one with stronger virtues than when you entered. That's how obstacles become the way. Seneca's concept of amor fati, love of fate, isn't about passive resignation. It's about embracing reality with clear eyes and full effort, even when the outcome isn't what we hoped. Picture a mediator stepping into a family dispute where siblings haven't spoken in years. She listens deeply, reflects back their pain with precision, and offers pathways to reconciliation. But despite her skill, the siblings walk away unmoved, still entrenched in bitterness. A reactive mindset would call this a failure, the Stoic perspective. The mediator's success wasn't in changing their minds, it was in upholding her own integrity throughout the attempt. She controlled her preparation, her presence, her words. The rest belonged to fate. This distinction reshapes how we define victory in communication. Modern workplaces often reward persuasion metrics: deals closed, conflicts resolved, agreements signed. But Stoicism asks a more radical question. What if the true measure of success isn't the other person's response, but the quality of your own effort? Consider a manager delivering feedback to a defensive employee. If the employee rejects the advice, does that negate the manager's clarity and care in delivering it? The Stoics would argue no. Just as a doctor isn't a failure when a patient refuses treatment, a communicator isn't defeated when their words aren't immediately embraced. History offers a poignant example in Seneca's own life. Exiled by Emperor Claudius for allegations of adultery, a charge he denied, he could have spent years railing against the injustice. Instead, he turned his banishment into a period of profound productivity, writing some of his most enduring works. In letters to friends, he reflected, "I did not change my principles to suit my circumstances. I changed my circumstances to suit my principles." That's amor fati in action, pouring energy into what he could control: his mindset, his writing, while releasing attachment to what he couldn't: the emperor's whims. Now apply this to a strained conversation you've had recently. Maybe you apologized sincerely, but the other person remained cold. Or perhaps you advocated passionately for an idea that was dismissed outright. The instinct is to equate outcome with worth. If they didn't change, I must have failed. But the Stoic framework flips this. Did I speak with honesty? Listen without agenda. Stay anchored in my values. If so, the result is secondary. Like a gardener who tends seeds with care but can't force them to sprout, your role is to plant with integrity, not dictate the harvest. This philosophy shines in high-stakes diplomacy. The 1994 South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission saw victims facing their tormentors with raw honesty, not knowing if their words would elicit remorse or defiance. Many perpetrators never apologized, yet the act of speaking truth without guarantee of reciprocation became its own form of healing. As Archbishop Tutu, who chaired the hearings, often said, "Justice isn't about revenge, it's about restoring dignity." That's amor fati at scale, doing the right thing because it's right, not because it guarantees a particular response. So next time you brace for a difficult conversation, try this reframe. Prepare not for the reaction you want, but for the integrity you owe yourself. Did you express yourself clearly? Did you leave room for their perspective? Did you stay true to your principles? If the answer is yes, then regardless of the outcome, you've already won. Because in the end, the only response you can truly command is your own, and that's where real power has always lain. Marcus Aurelius began each morning with a simple but radical practice. He'd remind himself of the flaws he'd likely encounter in others that day, not to judge or resent them, but to prepare his own heart. When you wake up, he wrote in his journal, tell yourself that the people you meet will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, and dishonest. But here's the twist. He followed this with a profound insight. They are like this because they cannot tell good from evil. That shift from condemnation to clarity holds the key to Stoic forgiveness. It's not about excusing harm or pretending hurt doesn't matter. It's about recognizing that people act from their own limitations, not yours. And when you see brokenness instead of malice, the weight of grudges begins to lift. There's a crucial distinction here that modern psychology echoes. Forgiveness isn't the same as trust. You can release resentment toward a cheating partner without inviting them back into your bed. You can forgive a business partner who embezzled funds without ever sharing a bank account again. The Stoics called this discernment, the wisdom to separate emotional healing from practical boundaries. Consider the story of a woman whose best friend betrayed a lifelong confidence. For months, she oscillated between rage and sadness until she stumbled on Seneca's letters. He wrote of a similar betrayal, noting, "I choose not to hate you, but I also choose not to forget." That became her mantra. She wrote the friend a letter releasing her anger, then calmly stepped away from the friendship. The forgiveness was for her, the boundary was for her peace. History offers a striking parallel in Thomas More's final moments. As he mounted the executioner's block, condemned by Henry Roman VIII for refusing to endorse the king's divorce, he famously said to his betrayers, "I die the king's good servant, but God's first." No bitterness, no vengeance, yet no illusion that these were men he could trust. That Stoic forgiveness in its purest form, clear-eyed, unshaken, and free from the poison of perpetual resentment. Now think of a hurt you've carried, maybe a parent's neglect, a colleague's sabotage, or a lover's dishonesty. Ask yourself, what story have I attached to this pain? Often we replay wounds not because the injury still bleeds, but because we've tied them to our identity. "I'm the person they wronged" becomes a badge we wear, a reason to stay stuck. Marcus Aurelius would challenge that. His mourning ritual wasn't about rehearsing grievances, it was about practicing detachment. "The best revenge," he wrote, "is to be unlike those who harmed you." Not by holding their flaws against them, but by refusing to let those flaws define your own character. Here's the litmus test. If someone who hurt you genuinely changed, would your resentment? If the answer is no, then the grudge isn't about them anymore, it's about you. That's when forgiveness becomes an act of self-liberation, like a sailor cutting an anchor, not because the anchor is flawed, but because the ship was meant to move forward. So today, try Marcus' mourning exercise with a modern twist. Instead of anticipating others' flaws, list one you're ready to release, not for their sake, but for yours. Because the Stoics knew a secret modern science confirms: resentment is a fire you stoke while waiting for someone else to feel the heat, and life's too short to keep burning yourself to keep others warm. Musonius Rufus, the Stoic teacher exiled by Emperor Nero, didn't just survive his banishment, he thrived in it, turning a remote Greek island into a classroom where students from Rome, Egypt, and Syria gathered. Picture this: a Roman aristocrat, a Syrian merchant, and an Egyptian scribe sitting together, debating ethics not as representatives of their cultures, but as seekers of wisdom. Their conflicts weren't suppressed, they were refined through Stoic discipline. When the Syrian criticized Roman excess, Musonius didn't demand agreement. He asked, "What virtue does your critique serve?" When the Roman bristled at Egyptian customs, the lesson was, discomfort is the price of understanding. This was cultural calm in action, respect without surrender, curiosity without compromise. Fast forward to a modern tech startup where tensions erupt between team members from hierarchical South Korean and egalitarian Swedish backgrounds. The Korean designer hesitates to challenge her Swedish manager's ideas directly, leaving feedback vague to preserve harmony. The Swede misreads this as disengagement and presses for blunt honesty, sparking frustration on both sides. Enter Stoic reframing. Instead of labeling one approach right, they explore the why behind each style. The Korean learns that in Sweden, directness signals respect for colleagues' competence. The Swede realizes that in Korea, careful phrasing honors collective dignity. Neither abandons their roots, they simply add tools to their toolkit. As Musonius taught, the wise person's homeland is the world, but wisdom lies in navigating its differences without losing yourself. History offers a masterclass in this balance through the Roman Emperor Julian, who blended Stoicism with his studies of Persian and Greek thought. Facing a mutiny from Germanic troops unused to Roman discipline, he didn't demand submission. He adapted. Julian held open forums where warriors could voice grievances through intermediaries, honoring their cultural preference for indirect communication while maintaining order. The result: loyalty stronger than any forced obedience could yield. This wasn't cultural appropriation. It was cultural negotiation, grounded in Stoic respect for reality as it is, not as we wish it to be. Now turn the lens inward. Think of a time you clashed with someone whose communication style felt alien, maybe a colleague who interpreted your enthusiasm as aggression, or a relative who mistook your silence for indifference. The Stoic question isn't who's wrong, but what's unseen here. A Japanese business partner's prolonged silence during negotiations might signal deep consideration, not disinterest. An Italian teammate's animated gestures might reflect passion, not anger. The moment we swap assumptions for inquiry, help me understand how this lands for you, or we transform friction into fertile ground. Consider how culture shapes even our perception of time. In Germany, a delayed meeting is disrespect. In Brazil, it might be relational flexibility. Stoicism doesn't adjudicate which clock is correct. It trains us to separate our judgments from the event itself. When a Moroccan vendor insists on tea before discussing contracts, the Stoic adjusts their expectations rather than resenting the wasted hour. Why? Because, as Epictetus observed, we are disturbed not by things but by the views we take of them. The tea isn't the obstacle, our impatience is. The ultimate test comes when values collide. Imagine a Canadian manager whose Indigenous Australian employee requests leave for a weeks-long cultural ceremony during a critical project. The Stoic response: acknowledge the tension without vilifying either need. This timing is challenging and your tradition matters. Let's solve for both. That pivot from either slash or to both slash and is where Stoic flexibility shines. It's not relativism, it's recognizing that culture, like water, takes the shape of its container without ceasing to be itself. So next time you're baffled by someone's conflict style, ask Musonius' question: what does this teach me about human complexity? You might still disagree, but you'll disagree with depth. And in that depth lies the quiet power to stand firm in your values while making space for others to stand firm in theirs, not as a truce, but as a testament to the many ways wisdom wears a face. Epictetus once asked his students a piercing question that cut straight to the heart of digital age conflict. If someone spoke poorly of you behind your back, would you care as much as if they said it to your face? Now imagine that scenario amplified 1,000-fold: anonymous comments, faceless usernames, entire communities dedicated to tearing down ideas and people without consequence. This is the modern arena where Stoic communication faces its toughest test. The screen doesn't just shield us from accountability, it warps our perception of impact. Typing "you're an idiot" to a pixelated avatar feels weightless compared to watching those same words make someone flinch across a dinner table. But here's what anonymity forgets: the person reading your rage is real. And so are the neural pathways you strengthen every time you indulge in digital hostility. History offers a sobering parallel. Ancient Athenian philosophers debated in the agora face-to-face with reputations at stake. Even when disagreeing fiercely, they maintained decorum because their words carried visible consequences. Contrast that with today's Reddit threads or YouTube comments, where users lob verbal grenades from bunkers of anonymity. The Stoic antidote: treat every online interaction as if your real name accompanied it. Before posting, ask Epictetus' second question: would I say this in a room full of people who know me? That tiny pause is the digital equivalent of Seneca's delay tactic, the space where reason overtakes reaction. Try this experiment next time you're baited online. Draft your fiery rebuttal. Pour all your wit and venom into it then, and this is crucial: close the tab without hitting send. There's profound Stoic training in this act. You've honored your feelings by expressing them, key to emotional honesty, but you've refused to let them control you, key to emotional mastery. Like a boxer pulling punches during sparring, you release the energy without causing harm. Over time, you'll notice something transformative. The urge to engage diminishes. You start recognizing trolls not as enemies to conquer, but as distractions to bypass, much like Marcus Aurelius viewing provocations as like barking dogs, annoyances to walk past, not confront. But the deeper issue isn't just how we treat strangers online, it's how the screen alters our very capacity for empathy. Neuroscience reveals a troubling gap. Face to face, we mirror others' emotions through facial cues and tone. But flat text on a screen strips away those humanizing signals, making it easier to dehumanize the person behind the words. That's why you might never call your neighbor a moron to their face, yet type it casually in a political thread. The Stoics foresaw this challenge 2 millennia before keyboards existed. Epictetus warned, when someone acts badly toward you, ask yourself, what good or harm did they see in this action? Online, we rarely pause for that question. We assume malice where ignorance or pain might reside. Consider the last viral outrage cycle you witnessed, perhaps a celebrity's tone-deaf tweet or a company's poorly worded response. Notice how quickly condemnation spreads, how little curiosity exists about intent versus impact. Now imagine applying Stoic detachment. What if we approached online conflicts like doctors diagnosing rather than warriors attacking? Not how dare they. But what misunderstanding led here? This isn't about excusing harm. It's about preventing the spiral where one careless post begets 1,000 cruel replies. The ultimate test comes when you're not anonymous, when your real identity is attached to every word. A LinkedIn debate about workplace ethics, a Facebook discussion with relatives about vaccines, a verified Twitter account where clients might see your replies. Here, Stoicism shines brightest. You learn to disagree without demeaning, to correct without shaming, to stand firm without needing the last word. Because when your name and face accompany your words, you remember what the ancients never forgot. Communication isn't about winning points, it's about maintaining integrity in an interconnected world. So tonight, before you tap post on that clever retort or scathing critique, hear Epictetus whispering across the centuries. If you wish to improve, be content to appear clueless or stupid. The screen hasn't changed human nature, it's just given our worst impulses louder megaphones and softer consequences. But you can choose differently. Not because anyone's watching, but because you know the measure of your character isn't taken in moments of visibility, but in those 1,000 unseen moments when only your conscience bears witness. Imagine starting your day not with a frantic scroll through emails, but with a blank page and one simple question: how will I choose my words today? This is the power of Stoic journaling, not just recording thoughts, but preparing your mind for the conversations ahead. Marcus Aurelius began his mornings by writing reminders like, "Today I shall meet interference, ingratitude, insolence," not to dwell on negativity, but to inoculate himself against reactivity. Try this modern twist. Each morning, jot down one communication intention. Maybe it's listen without interrupting during the team meeting, or respond calmly if my partner criticizes my cooking. These aren't resolutions, they're mental rehearsals. Like an athlete visualizing a race, you're priming your mind for the interactions that matter most. Seneca took this further with his legendary evening ritual. Before sleep, he'd revisit the day's conversations like a philosopher reviewing lecture notes. Not to judge himself harshly, but to observe patterns. Did I speak from ego or understanding? Did my silence stem from patience or fear? His letters reveal how this practice transformed petty arguments into lessons. One night, he realized his sharp reply to a servant came not from the servant's error, but from Seneca's own lingering stress about a financial loss. That awareness became the antidote to misplaced anger. Your version might look like a 5-minute mental recap. When did I feel most defensive today? What triggered it? No guilt, just curiosity that illuminates blind spots. Between these bookends, morning intention and evening reflection, lies your Stoic communication checklist. Not rigid rules, but guiding questions to pause mid-conversation. 1. Is this response necessary? Marcus Aurelius filter. 2. Does it align with who I aspire to be? Seneca's character test. 3. Am I interpreting facts or assumptions? Epictetus reality check. Keep it simple. A notes app, a pocket notebook, even 3 tally marks on your wrist, each tally representing 1 checkpoint. Over time, these pauses become automatic, like a pianist's muscle memory for scales. Now consider your own rhythm. Maybe journaling feels daunting, but you could pair evening reflection with brushing your teeth, 2 minutes of mental review while scrubbing. Or use your commute to audit yesterday's conversations. The format matters less than the consistency. A client of mine started with just 1 weekly ritual. Every Sunday, he'd identify 1 conversation he handled well and 1 he'd like to improve. Within months, his team noticed his newfound calm during heated debates. Here's the invitation. What single habit could anchor your communication tomorrow? Perhaps it's taking 3 breaths before responding to your child's tantrum, or scripting a neutral reply to that colleague who always provokes you. Test it for 3 days, not as a lifetime commitment, but as an experiment. Like Seneca tracking his progress, observe what shifts, because the goal isn't perfection, it's presence, and presence, the Stoics remind us, is the soil where wise words grow. If we zoom out and look at everything we've explored, those heated moments where words fly faster than thoughts, where frustration drowns out understanding, what Stoicism offers isn't just a set of communication tools. It's a complete recalibration of how we engage with conflict itself. Every argument, every misunderstanding, every tense exchange becomes an invitation to practice something deeper, the art of turning collisions into connections. Think back to the power of the pause, that split-second choice between reaction and response. Remember how shifting perspective, whether through Marcus Aurelius' view from above or Seneca's lens of empathy, can dissolve resentment before it takes root. Recall the transformative effect of speaking with purpose, where words are no longer weapons but bridges. These aren't just techniques, they're ways of rewiring our instincts, 1 intentional interaction at a time. Epictetus was onto something profound when he said, "We suffer not from events but from our judgments." Those words cut straight to the heart of why Stoic communication works. The coworker's harsh email, the partner's thoughtless remark, the stranger's rude comment, they only sting because we've assigned them meaning. What if, instead of reacting to the surface-level noise, we pause to ask, what story am I telling myself about this? That question alone can unravel hours of imagined slights, because when you realize most conflict stems from unchecked interpretations, not malice, you gain the power to rewrite the script in real time. Here's your challenge for the coming week. Choose just one of these tools to test in the wild. Maybe it's letting go of a should, that persistent belief that someone ought to act differently. Perhaps it's experimenting with the strategic silence of Cotto in your next disagreement, or borrowing Musonius Rufus' open posture during a tense conversation. Don't try to overhaul every interaction at once. Mastery comes through repetition, not revolution. Like a blacksmith tempering steel, each small, deliberate practice strengthens your capacity for calm. And if you found even a sliver of value here, if these ancient ideas feel surprisingly relevant to modern misunderstandings, then consider this your invitation to go deeper. The Stoics left us a treasure trove of wisdom on everything from leadership to resilience, and we're just scratching the surface. Hit subscribe and let's keep exploring how to live and communicate with more clarity, less chaos, and unshakable calm. Because the world needs fewer reactive voices and more who have learned the quiet power of responding.